Welcome Strategy Battle Gamers to another Great British Hobbit League video. As ever, I'm James, and today I'm going to be talking about my first ever Hobbit Strategy Battle Game tournament, which happened this weekend. It was up at Preston, the Battle for Middle England. Now this is the first time I've ever attended a tournament. As you know, as you keep on commenting on a lot of the other videos, I'm a relatively new player, so it was really interesting to get down to a tournament, to meet the rest of the community, and see what it's all about. So in this video I'm going to be discussing about my thoughts about how the tournament went, how I got on, things that I thought were really good about it, things that I thought could improve. I'm here with my notes, so do bear with me, we've got quite a lot to go through. But I do hope you enjoy this video. Definitely carry on watching this video if you're not currently involved in any of the tournaments, if you're a new player and you want to see if this is something for you. You know, this is going to be a great review for you. So first of all, let's talk about the tournament itself and how I got on. I took the all-mounted list, which in the practice games, as you've been seeing on the battle reports, has been doing really well. Now it is a list that many people on the forums talk about not being able to work, and I have to say that I did struggle at this tournament. Now, I wasn't going there to be ultra competitive, but of course in any game it is nice to win. And I'm going to talk through some of the reasons why that might not have happened during this tournament. So the tournament format was that we had 4 games on the first day and we had 3 on the second day. There were 6 standard scenarios which we worked up through. On the final day there was a really fun looking scenario called The Hunt. Now on the Saturday, unfortunately I could only stay for half of the day because I had a birthday present from my birthday for this weekend, so I did have to get off for those 2 games. I only got 2 games on the first day, which was a little bit of a shame. Now one of the things that I was a little bit disappointed about, and this is no offence to my first 2 players, but I was really looking forward to going to this tournament to play against some new players, some new armies, to meet people and to have a good time. And yeah, I did all of that. I had a great time. The guys were great. We had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. But my first 2 games were against 2 players which I can play every single week. So when I go to the tournament, I'm thinking, you know, I do want to be playing different players. These guys live just down the road from me. They've played me in practice games. I've already played their armies. They've already played against mine as well. So they've got a little bit of an idea what's going on. And I was a little bit disappointed about that. That's not to say that I didn't have a great time. Now, this is going to sound like I'm making lots of excuses, but I was incredibly poorly on the Saturday morning when I arrived. Really bad. I think anybody who was there, and those guys who are watching this now will agree, I got in, I had to keep running to the toilet. I don't want to go into graphic detail. Now these are timed games, and that did have an impact on what was happening in the first game. Now there were various boards that were set up and you were drawn to play against players. I didn't really know how that worked. I didn't really know how the drawing got worked out, whether there was some kind of seeding, but I did end up playing against Lewis, who's from Oldham, which is just down the road, and his mixture of the new Erebor Spear Dwarves with Dwalin, his Balin and Khazad-Guard, who he puts in the front, and also the Legolas, which is pretty difficult for me to deal with because he's just auto-hitting my horses of my heroes all of the time and making it really hard for my army to be as manoeuvrable and hard-hitting as it can be. So we did play him. Now I have to say, we were playing on, there was one table that was set up which was Goblin Town scenery. Now I don't know if you've seen the Escape from Goblin Town starter box set and the scenery, but this is like lots of little wooden walkways. Charles has actually made a lot of this himself, so he's not just used the start set, he's got it laser done and laser cut, and he made up this great board, and it looked fantastic. For an all cavalry list to be playing on that board was really tough. It was really tough because immediately all of the advantages of, you know, being able to outmaneuver your opponent, being able to, you know, hold back, strike in, you know, counter charge because he's come round and he's trying to swarm your cavalry. I couldn't do any of that. Now, being very aware of this and going in for the fights, the games at the tournament are exactly an hour and a half long, so you don't have too long to play. The game at the tournament, 500 points, an hour and a half. in that first game, with me having to run to the toilet, that meant that a lot of time was going on that, and although I could have played for a draw if I was being ultra competitive, which I might have done, it would have been really harsh on Lewis, and I would have felt a bit aggrieved if I was him, if we had drawn because the time had run out, and if I'd been running to the toilet. So in the end, you know, we were both rushing through it, and I just was throwing stuff at him, let him kill it, and not let him get the victory. That sounds really bad, but really try and make sure that the game didn't end kind of in an unsatisfactory way for him. You know, because I don't think he gets to go to loads of tournaments, and I certainly didn't want to be the reason why he didn't enjoy himself or feel that he did as well if I was stalling him, because you can get done for time wasting. Everybody could tell that I generally wasn't very well, but that was one thing. So yeah, I was a little bit disappointed for playing Lewis, but as ever, you know, good fun to play against him. He's got some wacky dice rolling going on, and I have to say that kind of combination of the new Hobbit dwarves, which if you haven't seen them, they're lovely. He didn't actually have the models. He stuck some toothpicks on the back of some normal dwarves with shields, effectively making him look like a spearman, and then had the Khazad in the front. We're going to see a lot of those types of armies, I think. My review of that army, yeah, it's pretty tough. You know, you've got strength 4 along the front, defense 7 all the way through, spear support. Barlin's a bit of a beast with his Durian's axe. Dwarlin is an absolute tank. You know, if he wins that fight, which, you know, he can do, he is a killing machine. One thing that Lewis was talking about doing was bringing him on a pony, which would give him that extra attack, bit of manoeuvrability as well, and that would just be lethal, because he wouldn't suffer the -1. He can take a two-handed weapon, on his pony, and he still doesn't suffer the -1 to the dual roll for being burly, so it's pretty powerful. The one thing that I don't like about his list is the fact that he brings the Legolas, which obviously, you know, it takes away from the theme. You know, no offence, Lewis, but it takes away from the theme a little bit. And of course, I don't like it because he's shooting my horses. So that was the one thing. I hope he changes that out just for theme's sake. I think that you can still have a great chance without that model in there. So that was our first game. Started to perk up a little bit in time for the second game, and luckily I wasn't on that anti-cavalry board. That's what we're going to call it now. We're going to call it the anti-cavalry board. So that was to the death. And I lost that technically 5-0 because he broke me, and I didn't break him back. No wounds on any leaders or anything. Like I say, would probably have tried to play for the draw and run away with my cavalry. To be fair, that was the only way that I could have won that, unless I'd have wounded his leader, which was going to be tough. I couldn't get the models in there. So the second game was against the tournament organiser, Charles, against the Haradrim army, which you've seen me talk about before. All Watchers of Karna, lots of bows. Watchers of Karna have got 2 attacks, supported by spears, got a few raiders in there. It's a tough force for me to beat. Now, Reconnoiter is where you've got to get across the board, get your models across, but it's not as straightforward as that. It's not just a sort of game of Bulldog and you try and get your models across. When the models across, it's over. If you get all of your models across and they get all of yours, as a cavalry army, he would still have beaten me. You have to roll priority, and then you roll to see if you come on. Now, I did have a bit of a strategy for this game, because I thought it's going to be very hard for me to actually beat him, to actually fight him. So my goal was really to try and get at least 5 models, because my force is 20 models, so 25% of my force, try and get that off of the board, including Aemma, my general, so he couldn't wound my general. I was going to do that on the flanks, and I was going to go up the middle and effectively just try and die in the middle and let him swarm me, try and keep some things back to stall him up. However, the problem with that in our Reconnoiter game was that I didn't come on for the first 3 turns. So this meant that Charles could effectively advance up that board really far before I could even do anything. And he shot away quite a lot of my stuff. I don't think he realised that he could have lost the game by killing me too quickly for a long time. And by the time he did, it could have been actually quite close. So a few little desperate moves, it could have gone a little bit differently. It ended up being a storming victory for him because he could just get all of his forces across the board. I wasn't dropping down to the 25%, which I needed to for the game to end in time. Even though I was trying, he was trying not to kill me by striking the horses. I was trying to be killed by doing, wacky special strikes when I shouldn't have really been doing, and everything. So yeah, ended up being quite a convincing victory on paper for him, but probably a little bit closer in terms of how it could have panned out. I think if I'd have come on in the first or even second turns, my strategy would have been a lot better. The way that I would have changed my strategy is that I actually sent a lot of my hard hitters up the middle and tried to get off the board with some of the models which aren't as great in combat, so things like the Outriders and some of the Westfold Red Shields, really. Now the issue with that is that meant that it was harder for him to kill me in the middle, which in my mind meant that it was going to delay him for longer. But it did mean that my models going around the outside weren't as tough, and really it was about I should have got those 4 Sons of Or off of the board, I should have got Aomer off of the board, I should have sent men effectively 1 or 2 at a time, kept in his bow range so he would shoot me to death effectively, send 1 at a time to delay him, or 2 at a time, and just stall him and stall him and stall him. When he did start advancing up, dismounting my troops, effectively making a big long line, forcing him to fight through me, forcing him to effectively kill me before he could get any models off the board. That probably would have been my strategy. But fair and square game, and you learn, don't you? You learn. And that was another great thing about the tournaments, is that you're doing all of the scenarios. So you do have to really think, how do I win this scenario? And if you lose sight of that, you can very, very quickly go from being in a strong position to losing the game. So that was my 2 games on the first day, and then we had some lunch, some burgers, a barbecue, and it was a great opportunity to catch up with a lot of the rest of the players. Now these 2-day tournaments, a lot of the players actually stay over, and although I had plans, it would have been nice to have done that and had a drink with everybody in the pub, because that's what it's all about, meeting people, and as Damien rightly said, talking about toy soldiers as if it's the most important thing in the world, because that's why I do this. I do this because it stops me from thinking about my business, and it chills me out. It absolutely chills me out. So I managed to watch some of the third round before I had to get off, and then I arrived the next day and was seeded to play Lords of Battle against Joe and his Mumak. Now he had Mumak, which is the gorgeous model. It's the big Oliphant, and on top of that he had some Serpent Guard, I think, with spears, and he had 6 of those. He had the Beastmaster guy. He had tons of upgrades on his Mumak, and he also had some bowmen. Now in Lords of Battle you get points for killing models, so that was always going to be tough for me. And at that point I have to say, having had to play the tournament organiser and against an army that has already been played against, having to play against dwarves on Goblin town scenery as cavalry, there was a little bit of me that was thinking, this isn't really going to be my weekend, this isn't set up for me. I have to say, the game against Joe is by far the most thematic game I've ever played in. You've got all-mounted Rohan against the Mumak, and it was fantastic. Now I have to say that strategically, my strategy, my tactics actually worked, which was one of the problems with the Mumak is that it can't trample through difficult terrain. So, and he has to move his full distance 8 inches, rotating on the base. Now, if he can't rotate through some of the big terrain or on the edge of the boards, then he has to go in a straight line. And that's what we did. We had 2 terrain pieces here. I started off hiding behind them both, so he had to come forward. I sent some models out effectively as bait. We did a few things like we did some heroic moves, etc., really just to keep my heroes from getting trampled, because that's a bad way if they end up on foot. And I knew that with the fight 5 of Aomer and Erkenbrand, when he's fight 4, if I could get rid of his might by making him counter heroic moves and spreading those between my 2 heroes, that I could literally just go in there and I wouldn't have to heroic strike or anything. He wouldn't be able to heroic strike me, and therefore if I could get enough dice on it, surround it, make sure I could heroic move him, he would be in a bad way. And then I effectively was luring him around the table. So I lured him round. He couldn't turn because he would have been off the table, and that just meant that I could hit him from behind. So every turn it was in combat, and it wasn't really trampling. Now, my opponent Joe, he didn't realise, but he did tell me that the Mumak was monstrous cavalry, which would mean that I wouldn't get the +1 to the charge. It turned out that it isn't. And Sam Page, Southern Dunedain, he did come over and say you should have been getting your attacks. I think we worked out as a minimum I hadn't rolled 26 attack dice, which probably makes sense actually, because in the 4 turns of combat that I got the Mumak into, I only caused 5 wounds, I think, 5 wounds, and he had trampled quite a bit of my army, to the point where I think I did actually get broken. I did get broken, so it was looking like he was running away with it. For a long time I only had, 6 victory points. I think I got a wound on his, forced his leader to take a fate roll, and got the 5 wounds on the Mumak. Then in the final turn of the game, it was incredibly exciting. We had a son of Earl who charged in, passed his courage test. We had Aema, who really hadn't done anything. Erkenbrand had been killed. Aema hadn't really done anything. He hadn't caused any wounds. And we also had 2 Royal Guard in that combat. And in that situation, we won the fight. And as we've been doing all the way through, I was piercing striking with the son of Earl, which means that if I'd have lost the fight, I would have gone down in defence by D3, and vice versa. By winning, I go up in strength by D3. And the son of Earl hadn't been causing any of those wounds either. He'd really not doing great, even though he could have been wounding on 5s, which would have been great. And in that final turn, he rolled 3 5s, so that was 3 more wounds. So we had 2 more wounds to do. Aema rolled, and I was thinking, this is it, this is where I'm going to get him. And he rolled 1s and 2s, and really poor effort. He needed 6s. So I had 2 Royal Guard, both of which had been fainting. They needed 6s and 4s in order to cause a wound. I rolled a 6 and a 1. I rolled the 6 and got a 4. And then I re-rolled the 1 and got a 6 and rolled a 5, and the Mumak was dead. And it was a fantastic moment for both of us, really. It was a shame that Joe lost. I really thought he was going to win that game. But from a cinematic point of view and a drama point of view, it was great. Everything on the Howdah fell down, died. I think he only had 2 models left when the game ended. So we shook hands, everything in the game kind of balanced out, and that was my first victory and my only victory of the tournament. After that, I did get drawn against... Who did I get drawn against? Against Samuel Jeffries. Samuel Jeffries, just like Joe, absolutely great guy, and a very good player as well. He brought Goblins, and he had Knight of Umbar on a Fell Beast. He had Gundabad Black Shields, he had spear support of cheaper goblins behind, and he had some of the new goblins and a goblin captain, I believe. But again, I got drawn to play on the anti-cavalry scenery. And I did say, because the Mumak wouldn't have been allowed to play on it, and I don't think the Fell Beast army was allowed to play on it. And it was kind of a disadvantage. I would say, although it was fantastic, probably a fantastic challenge for everybody else, and they probably really enjoyed having that there. If you're going to have a tournament where there are point scores to see where you rank in the tournament, anything which can impact the game significantly compared to other people playing games at the same time or the same scenario at the same time is a big disadvantage. So if you're going to have a Goblin Town board, I think you've got to have that Goblin Town board, across all of the boards on the same scenario for everybody, because it was very hard. I mean, it was hold ground, and the centre of the board was a platform which cavalry couldn't get underneath. So all he had to do was get goblins underneath there, really, and he's got more models, and he would win. And my goal was really just to cram the top of the objective, because my cavalry models couldn't fit underneath, and die quickly and maybe kill the Wraith on the Fell Beast, the Knight of Umbar, which I did manage to do. It was a great game. I'm not saying that I would have won in a different situation, but I would have had more of a chance. It was a bit of a sticker, really, that no matter what I would have done, it would have been very hard for me to, it would have been impossible for me to win that once he got models underneath the platform, which my cavalry models couldn't reach him. Now if that had been a flat board, I would have gone out there, I would have held up his forces, I would have got everything else onto the objective and just sort of sent riders out and hold him up really, kind of eliminate one warband at a time, use my manoeuvrability. Now that's not to say that would have worked. Samuel Jeffrey is a very good player and a really great guy. I really enjoyed playing against him, and again it was really great playing against a player that I've not played before. That was pretty good. So I did enjoy it. Now at this point, having technically conceded one game and being given a bye for one game because of the previous day, we had an odd number of people at the tournament. And a little bit of an argument started, not to put anybody off, but a little bit of an argument started about who should take the next bye. Basically because there were a lot of players who were in contention for winning the tournament, a lot of whom hadn't had a bye so far, who maybe should have had to sit out a game. The four of us who had taken byes so far were effectively then being asked, because of the stakes at the other end of the spectrum, to miss another game. And you know, nobody likes to be asked to miss a couple of games when you paid the same money as everybody else. And I think that was, you know, I can understand why it was asked. I think it was a bit wrong to ask everybody, but I didn't mind. I actually put my hand up and said, you know, listen, I've only had 2 games. This is my first ever tournament. I'm having a great time. It's been fantastic to meet everybody. I've got some interviews. You know, I would have liked to play some different players. I think I would have been due to play against Sam Page and his Hobbit dwarves. That would have been fantastic. I would have loved that. But you know, with the stakes being so high at one end, and with players who had paid the same as everybody else and had already missed a game, I thought, you know, come on, take me out, give me £10 of my money back, because effectively I've done one day as a tournament, and I'll get more from just watching everybody else. I don't mind. You know, my position in the tournament doesn't really matter, or even in the league standings, not until we had an attack last year. And I think everybody was pretty chuffed that I did that, and I actually got voted, you know, best sportsmanship at the end, which wasn't the reason why I did that at all. I did it for the money. No, I did it because it would have been unfair for the 4 players for the 3 other players who were further down, who'd already had to miss a game, to then have to miss another game. It didn't matter so much for me, in my eyes. So it was good to watch everybody. There was some real tension about who was winning at the end. If you've not already seen some of the interviews, the winner eventually was Tom Harrison and his Wood Elves, his Wood Elf army, which looked like it was pretty effective. I would have loved to play it, especially after playing against Jamie's Wood Elves and doing so well. I really would have liked to play his and see how I'd got on. Not on the Goblin town scenery though. You know, just don't put me on that scenery. Then there were also other awards as well. There was an award for Best Army. Now I was really confused about this, and this is one of the things I think could definitely be improved. I don't know if it's like this at other tournaments, but a lot of that tournament, as a new player, I really didn't know what was going on in terms of, you know, the actual structure of it, or voting for things, or anything at all. I think if there are new players, maybe it's best to sort of pair them up with a mentor, effectively, someone who is going to guide them through what's going on at the tournament, because it was only at the last second I was even asked, well, you know, to give a vote for what I felt was Best Army. And I could only pick from 3 of the armies that were there. Now, this is no offence to the 3 guys who got picked, but the way that I saw it, or the way that it was described to me, that was Best Army was, which was the army which I would, if I was given a choice and could take home with me to have as mine, which one would I pick? And I have to say that I would have picked Sam Page's New Dwarves. You know, it's a gorgeous looking army. He'd done conversions from Grimhammers. I would have gone for that. And I'd like to play with them as well. I'd like to use that force. So that's where my vote would have gone. But I was only given three people to choose from. Sam Harrison's Wood Elves, Damien's Feral Uruk army, which won it in the end. Well done, Damien. That was a good looking army, and a very effective army by the looks of it as well, although he didn't do as well in the tournament as he would have liked. I think he's been consistent enough over the year to perform quite well. And then I was also given the choice of Mark Boland, 90 Knights, his Wood Elves, his Wood Elves, his Arnor Force, which I also thought was really good looking, and I think I actually gave the vote to that because, again, I would have liked to have taken the army home with his paint scheme and everything. That was pretty good. Okay, so looking at the negatives, I would say that, you know, in future there has to be some kind of seeding maybe, or something to consider, which is, you know, don't make players who are travelling somewhere play players that they can play immediately. Certainly not in the first round. You know, there must be some kind of way of maybe having pools, or whether you've got, you know, a northern pool, a southern pool, and maybe a Midlands pool. And, you know, when you're drawing out the names out of the hat, you draw one from the northern pool and one for a Midlands pool, or roll a dice, 1 to 3 is Midlands, you know, 4 to 6 it's the south. Just something like that, because I would have liked to have played a lot. I would have loved to have played against Damien. I would have loved to have played against, who else would I have liked to play against? Sam Page, and I would have really liked to play against Tom Harrison as well. Really have a good go with those. Owen, I would have loved to play Owen. What a nice guy, great looking army. You know, I really would have liked to have a go with those guys. But people like Mark Boland, Charles, Lewis, these are players that I can play week in, week out. So I can understand meeting up with them because of how the draw goes, but to start off with maybe some kind of seeding system so that we don't meet. Point number 2 for improvement, maybe, you know, when you've got new players there, maybe have someone who is explaining exactly what's going on. I have no idea how the scoring works on these tournaments. I think some kind of explanation. I think because there are so many experienced players, got to be really careful, really careful. I'm not saying it was really welcoming, everybody was great, but that it doesn't become some kind of clique, you know, where because you know what's going on, you assume that everybody else knows what's going on. A lot of the time I had no idea what was going on. And that's no offence to Charles either. You know, thank you very much, Charles, for organising what was a great tournament. Had lots and lots and lots of fun. But that's one thing that I would maybe suggest, is if you've got new players, you know, somebody who feels that they need mentoring, you know, someone volunteers to do that or is given that. The other thing is, if you're going to have a tournament, you know, and points are involved, don't make people play against people on boards which are going to disadvantage them. And it sounds like I'm making an excuse, but to play 50% of my games, you know, on that board was just, you know, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything. And I'm not saying I would have won those 2 games, but I would have had a much better chance, a much, much, much better chance. I had no chance. And nobody likes to hear any player say that, and they say, well, you know, you could have done this, you could have done that. I really didn't have a chance, and I wasn't despondent. I still enjoyed the games, particularly the second one with Sam Jeffries. First one with Lewis wasn't very well, but I think, you know, if you are going to come up with great scenery, it's got to be that everybody has to play on that scenery for that scenario. You know, so you get enough of that type of scenery for round 1, so everybody plays on Goblin Town, and then it's fair enough, because then in the next scenario, you know, you take that scenery off and maybe some other scenery comes on, and, you know, for the standard ones, I think the Goblin Town scenery would have been great in the Hunt. That would have made for a really, really good game for everybody, because it's more of a fun thing, and maybe have the rest of them on kind of more standard boards with the normal kind of terrain that you might see. So yeah, that's something that I think is definitely worth thinking about. Yeah, I would say that I would recommend these tournaments to everybody and anybody. This was my first tournament. I did technically get a wooden spoon. You know, I can think of lots of reasons for that. Would I bring all mounted Rohan again? Yes, definitely. In the practice games, it's been doing fantastic. I just don't feel like I had that many opportunities, apart from maybe the game against Charles, to kind of see it do what it can do. And even in the game against Charles, as Reconnoiter, you know, not coming on until turn 3 was really a killer. Sounds like a bunch of excuses. It's really not. It's really not. I wasn't expecting to go there and win. No, I wasn't. But I just think I could have had a better chance of winning at least one other game without being on that board. So Any new players who are thinking of getting involved in a tournament, do get yourself onto the Facebook page, subscribe to this channel for updates, get on the forums, get on the Last Alliance and the One Ring forums, and chat to other guys who are coming down and doing this, because it's a fantastic community. The guys are brilliant. We've got some video interviews up as well, so if you want to see what kind of armies they've brought, 500-point armies, what does well in the tournaments and why they think that it does well, and also see some of the personalities in this great community, make sure you check those out. So this has been James from the Great British Hobbit League YouTube channel. Keep an eye out for more battle reports. I've got 2 more to upload, and happy strategy battle gaming, guys.